Assalamu alaikum. So we have employee management system and we have it almost 50% designed. So let's see the execution first. So I've executed and it gives me a form of add a lecturer. I can give it name, nationality, salary, email, employee ID, department, degree and domain and say add employee. We have added a check on employee ID last time. So let's see the code that we did. So we have a controller in which we have our whole controller logic implemented. I will open the lecturer and there we have all the credentials or all the data members for the lecturer just briefly, and then we have some setters and getters and then a particular function for lecturer. Similarly, in model we have a lecturer model in which we were uh, having all the attributes and we were passing it to our linked list to be saved, and in right here we have a linked list, right? And we have a linked list whose name was linked list in which we were adding our object and searching for a particular employee ID and returning true or false. So for now, if I execute this, so I give it some name, for example, ABC, let's see, and nationality is let's say PK and salary is let's say 25,000. Email is something, let's say uh, AB maybe something, or employee ID is let's say 1234, and then there is department, let's say it's CS, the degree is SC and the domain is SC, right? And I say add employee, so it adds the employee and then clears out the form so I can add another employee. So if I go into its debugging mode, let's just give it a minute. So in the debugging mode, if I add, say, okay, add a particular employee whose name is ABC, nationality, let's say PK, the salary is whatever, email is something, employee ID is 1234, then department is something, degree is something, and then the domain is something, and I say add employee. It takes me to the debug panel, and right here it has all the attributes. Like we are at this location right now in our main screen where this lecture.add lecture function will be called, and I say step inside. We will step inside and we go to the controller where all of these have will be set to the lect model uh, object. This is like model right now, it's nulls or default value. So as soon as I say next, you will see the data is being populated there, and then I'm calling the function of lect model add lecturer, which is the model class, and I will step into it, and right here I'm inside the model class, and here you can see that all the data has been populated. Now I'm defining another local object inside the function, which is object to pass. This object will be the one that we were passing to our linked list to save the data. Now I say okay next, and this object is being populated right now. So you see right here, and the object is being populated. Now we search if this particular employee ID exists in our linked list or not. So we go step inside, and because our linked list is right now empty, it does not have anything, so this for loop will not execute, and it will return us the false value. So it returns the false, which means this ID is actually a unique ID. So we'll go further and we will add the lecturer into our left list. So as soon as I click on the add, the left list will be populated. Right now it's empty, but as soon as I click, you see right here, the data has been added. You see, right? 25 and whatever the data I have given, it has been added. Similarly, I say continue. So upon continue, the form will clear itself. Now I'm going to add another employee with the same employee ID just to show you that this is working. So whatever the employee ID is 1234, the department, the degree, and the domain or something. And I say add employee. It takes me back to the debugging panel. I say okay, go inside, and after going through all of this, inside of this, and then upon search, let's go inside the search. Now my left list have size of 1, and it will check for this. So it will get the employee ID and check if this in particular employee ID is actually equals to this employee ID, which is 1234. So the employee IDs will be equal, so it will return me true. It has returned me true, which means if the ID was invalid. So it will give me a system out invalid ID, and it will return us the false. Similarly, this return will go to the main controller, and here we will have certain data, and it will give us certain output right here in the main screen. If I go to the code right here, we have a to do. We may be showing some failure message box or something. So what we need to do right now, for continuing our application, that we do not want this to print on the console, rather we want this to be printed um, on some message box or somewhere, right, with GUI. So let's stop the debugging, and first of all I'm clearing this invalid ID from here because we do not need this here, and I'm coming to my main screen. In my main screen, I'm just going to put a message box. So I will say J. So J option P. Javix dot string J option P. I will select it. Dot show message dialog. Right. It has some particular parameters. So because right now I do not have any parent component, I will say it's null. And the message that I want my message box to show, it's invalid employee ID, date incorrect data. This incorrect data will be the title of the message box. J option in dot, this will be an error message, right? So I've done this. Now we are going to say execute, and as soon as it executes, I'm giving it some name like ABC, some nationality, some salary, some email, some employee ID like before, some department, some degree, and some domain. Saying add employee. It has been added successfully. Some name, some nationality, some salary, some email, some employee ID. Once again 1234, so that we can see that it's actually giving us the message box. Add employee, and it gives me right here incorrect data, invalid employee ID. So I say okay. I change the employee ID and say add employee, and the employee has been added. So this is what we need to do for all the other warning messages that we added in our last lecture. So I'm just simply going to copy this, and let's go above in our code. Right here we have all the system to doubts. So I'm changing it, and I'm saying invalid employee name, incorrect or empty data, and the rest will be same. Similarly, right here, valid employee nationality, empty data. I'm going to copy this particular junction pin, and invalid salary. We are going to do this as well. Invalid employee salary. So right here we had one check that we discussed in our last class, that email should contain the @ sign. So I'm going to add that sign here. So I'm going to say if the email text is empty, or txt email dot get text dot contain @ and I will add a note sign. This means if my email text field does not contain @ sign, then give invalid employee ID and print the incorrect or empty data, right? So let's go forward. So invalid employee ID, right here department, right here degree, the domain, and right. We are done with the rest of the things. So right now, if I execute it and I do not give it a name and I say add employee, it says invalid employee name. So I add an employee name, then I go and say add employee, it says invalid employee nationality. So I add a nationality, add employee, yeah, it says invalid employee salary, so I give it some salary, add employee, email is invalid, so I give it some email, add employee, but it still says invalid email. So as soon as I say @ you can even add the other checks like .com or etc, or if you're making for it for a certain domain like nu.edu something, so you can add it as well. So it says invalid employee ID now, so I put some ID. Next, department. So right, this whole thing will work for the whole, right? So now I say add employee and the employee has been added. So now let's move forward to our second operation, which was the delete operation. We want to delete a certain employee. So let's go to our design. So we are inside the design right now, and we are right here. We are going to add another panel. So I'm saying just add this particular panel, and I'm going to name this panel. Go to source, and I'm going to name it delete lecturer, right? Go back to the design, and right here I have to type delete lecturer. So let's make it absolute layout. The layout is done. Now I need a text field, and I will drop the text field right here, right? Or I can simply copy and paste our text field of employee ID along with its label from here. I'll say go to the delete and I will paste it right here. So right here I have this, and I will rename it as txt mid delete panel, right? Need to ensure that this particular employee ID text field is coming from the delete panel. So it's from the delete panel. So as soon as my user clicks on delete button, we will simply deleting the employee data, whoever have this particular employee ID. So let's change right here, delete employee. So this is btn delete employee. So as soon as my user clicks on this delete employee, I will be deleting. So right now if I say execute, you will see here is a delete lecturer. So if I say this is the lecturer, delete employee, it should delete the particular employee. So let's add an event handler. Add event handler, mouse clicked. So I'm going to cut this event handler from here. I'm going to paste it inside the event handlers like before. So I'm adding it right here. So the very first thing that we need to check is if our txt employee id is actually contains something. I will say if txt employee id dot get text dot is empty, the text is empty, then I will print a message box saying invalid employee id, invalid or empty employee id, right? So once this is done, I will go into the else, right? I will go into the else and I will set the lecturer employee ID to this dot set employee ID to whatever my user has entered into the txt employee ID dot get. So the ID has been set. Now I need to have a function set like dot delete lecturer. Of course, we do not have this function yet, so we are going to put this function. So right now it says create method or delete lecturer in type lecture. So I say yes, please create this particular method in delete lecturer. So this particular method has been auto generated. Now I need to just code it. So I'm saying okay, I have gotten an employee ID. I just need to set that employee ID for my lecturer model. So I will say lecturer model dot set employee ID to this dot employee ID, right? I will say return whatever my lect model dot, and I will call the same function delete lecturer for the lecturer model. Of course, we do not have the function yet, so it will ask me to add a function. So I will say create method in delete lecturer in lecturer m. So the method has been created and the return type I will set to the boolean. Of course, I'm getting a particular lecturer ID right now, and I'm just going to say I'm just going to search for this particular employee ID. So I will say if so I'm saying if db dot search this dot get employee ID. If this returns me true, that means the employee ID does exist. So if it does exist, then delete this ID. So db dot remove what this dot get employee ID. Of course, we need to make a function of remove in our DB. But let's first complete this function. So else return false because the ID is not there, so we cannot remove it. The ID is not there, but if the ID is there and we are calling the remove, so it should return true, right? So right here. Now we need to just devise this function of remove, and right here we have a function public void remove employee ID, and I'm just going to traverse my list just like I did in the search code right here. So I'm copying this for loop and I'm saying for loop go to the list size, and as soon as you get the employee ID that is actually equals to the employee ID that is passed as a parameter right here, employee ID, then do the select test dot remove this particular index, whatever that index is, right? If the zeroth index id is same as this particular employee id, then delete that or remove that particular index. If it's 1, 2 or whatever, delete those. So it will remove it. The lecturer m will return as true. The lecturer will return whatever this lecture model is returning, which is of course boolean. So it's returning me true. The main screen will get this. So if my leg.delete lecturer is returning me true, I will add a J option message box actually. So I will say if it's returning me true, I will say uh, in lecturer has been deleted successfully, right? And I will say operation um, deletion successful, right? And the J option pane will be information message, right? Or is it? Yeah, it will be uh, information message right here. But if it has returned me with the false, then I will say else the J option pane should give me a pop-up message saying employee ID does not exist. Employee ID does not exist and deletion failed, right? And G option pane will have error message right here. So it's done. Let's see if it's working correctly or not. So let's see. I'm executing. So let's first add an employee. So whatever the name, whatever the nationality, whatever the salary is, the employees, of course, we now need to add the rate in the employee. The employee ID is 1234, the department, the degree, the domain. And I say add employee. The employee has been added successfully. Now I'm going to the delete lecturer. So I'm writing some employee ID like 5678, which we haven't added yet. So I say delete employee. It says employee ID does not exist. So I say okay. I say okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and delete it, and I say delete employee. So it's it. Lecturer has been deleted successfully. Okay, and that's done. Of course, if it has been deleted successfully, then this should be cleared. So let's add this, and then we will see the debugging of it. I'm only going to say write txt this dot set text to an empty string right here, right? So now let's see it's debugging. So I'm adding a debugger. um, I'm actually first removing the previous debugging points. Okay, so I'm going to add a debugger right here, right? And I'm going to remove the previous debugger point, which was somewhere here. Okay, so let's see. I said debug. So right now we are here. We know I will add an employee with some nationality, with some salary, with some email, with some employee ID, with some department, degree, and domain. And I say add employee, and I will say just continue, and the employee will be added. Now I'm going into the delete, and I'm saying some else ID, right? Which does not exist. It should give me the operation unsuccessful. So it says go inside the lecturer dot delete lecturer. So I say go inside. So it's actually setting up the employee ID right here. Like model dot set employee ID to this temporary ID. So as soon as I click on next, so you can see the left employee ID has been set to 7896, and I say go inside this particular function. So as soon as I go inside this particular function, it's actually searching the for in my databases, so in a linked list. So I go inside, go inside the search function, and it will just operate like before. It will return us false because this particular id does not exist, and it returns us false. And I'll continue, and it will give us some error message saying employee id does not exist. I say okay, and then I give it some employee ID that actually is 1234, and I say delete this particular employee, and now we just going to see how is actually working. So it says lecture has been deleted successfully, and that's it. So if I say uh, continue, it will remove this 1234. But now we actually need to see how our linked list is being updated. So let's add another once again add an employee. So employee ID is again 1234, the department, the degree, and now this employee will actually be added because we have already deleted 1234. So this ID will not be the existing one. So I say continue, and the ID employee has been added. So now go to the delete lecturer and 1234. Delete this particular lecturer. It takes us to here. I say go inside and go inside. Jump. Now it's going to the remove. So I say go inside. So right here you can see the elect list contains one index and its employee ID is 1234. It keeps on searching for it, so as soon as it finds it, it removes it, and now your elect list is empty. And so it gives you that the lecturer has been deleted successfully and this time. So I say okay. So we are done with the delete operation. Now one operation is remaining, which is the edit operation, and you will be doing the search operation. So let's go back to the main screen and go to the design panel, and I'm going to add a panel right here, and I'm going to name this panel the search panel, right? Because I'm supposed to do the search and you're supposed to do the edit. So search lecturer. I'm going to the design. I'm going to get absolute layout. So the absolute layout has been added. Now for the search lecturer, we of course we need the employee ID. So I'm going to say take the employee ID and of course this button as well. Can copy them and paste them right here. Right here I have this, and of course I'm going to rename this txt field. I'm going to txt employee ID from search, right? And this particular button will be search employee, right? So this is search employee. Now I need to show the employee data, right? So I will add you can add a JLabel or you can actually add some text. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have name, nationality, salary, email, department, degree, and domain. Or maybe not the text boxes. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have name, age, gender, nationality, salary, email, department, degree, domain, copy them, and I'm going to paste them right here for the employee data to be shown in them. And I'm going to rename them. For example, I'm going to say I'll be the name of like search tab, and this particular is LBLH. This particular is LBL gender. This particular is LBL nationality. This particular is LBL salary. This one is employee. Sorry, email. This particular is department. This one is degree. This one is domain, right? So I'm just going to copy them, sorry, select them, and I'm going to bring them a bit up like this. right? So I have all the things, and this is btn search employee. So whenever my user have some id and clicks on search employee, I need to give that particular employee's data right here. So I will say go to the search employee, add an event handler, mouse clicked. So right here I'm going to cut that as well from here and go down to my event handlers, and I'm going to add it right here. So if my user has clicked on search employee, so the very first thing that we need to do is we actually need to check if he has actually entered some employee ID. So employee ID search dot get text dot is empty. So if it's empty, we need to print some message box. So this particular message box will be the right message box that will go right here, right? So we have a message box, and now I'm going to say, and if my user has actually entered an ID, so I'm going to actually search the data for that ID, particular ID. So I will say select dot get, select dot set employee ID first. So whatever my user has entered, txt employee ID dot get text. I will get that employee ID text, and I will say lect will be equals to lect, sorry, and I will say lect dot get down, right? So whatever this employee ID is, whatever the employee ID my user has entered, get its data. Of course, we do not have a get data function right now, so I will just click, and it will say if I want to create a method or not. So I will say create method get data in lecturer. So it has created this particular method. It will be returning the lecturer type object, right? It will be returning me a lecturer type object. So I say okay, it's auto generated. So I'm going to call a particular. I'm going to select model dot set. I'm going to pass that employee ID to my lect model. This dot get employee ID. Now I'm going to say that lect model should return me the whole data. So I'm saying lect model dot get data. Right? So I've seen I send my lect model to get me a particular data. Of course, I do not have this particular function right now, so I will just say okay, create method lect model, and of course lect model will be returning me a lecturer type object. With the help of the object, I'm actually returning my data. So the very first thing that we need to do is we actually need to check if this particular employee exists or not. So if the particular employee exists, we'll be returning some object here. Of course, it's still to do. But if it does not exist, then it will return us else it will return us return null, right? So this is to do for now. So if the particular employee exists, I will say db dot get data, right? With this particular employee ID, this dot get employee ID, right? So whatever this ID is, get me the data against this. So of course this function is not there, so I'm going to create it, and we are inside our database class. Now I'm going to say okay, so first I need to search, so I'm copying this code. So I'm searching for my particular employee ID employee. So if I get that, I will simply say return lect test dot get the particular index I, which has the same ID as this particular one, and this will be returning me a lecturer and type of object. So this particular function will actually return me a object of lecturer m where the IDs are same, and if it does not find any ID, then it will simply return me some null like this, and that's it's done. In lecturer m, I will simply say return that whatever this db.get data has returned, you return it, right? So it will simply return. In my lecturer, I will say this particular function has returned me a lect model type of data. So I will say, okay, let's get this particular lecturer m object. So I'm saying lecturer m obj, which is equals to whatever this particular function is returning me, right? Whatever this particular function is returning me, and I'm going to say that whatever this object is, set everything to this. So I'm going to say this dot uh, set name to obj dot get name, right? Similarly, this dot set age to obj dot get age. Similarly, this dot set gender to obj dot set gender, sorry, get gender. Obj dot get nationality, right here. After the nationality, it's salary. This dot set salary, obj dot get salary. This dot set email, obj dot get email. Then this dot set employee ID. We do not need, we need the department, obj dot get department. Then this dot set degree and obj dot get degree. Then this dot set domain and obj dot set domain, right? Sorry, get domain, obj dot get domain, and that's it, right? So we have done everything, and I will simply say done this. And we are going to do this if and only if my model dot get data is not equals to my null. If this is not equals to the null, then yes, do this, else return null. So it will return null. So now I have everything right here. My lect has given the data. I'm saying lect is equals to lect dot get data. Now I just need to set. I just need to say if lect is not equals to null, then do this. Now I'm going to lbl age dot, sorry, this is not lbl age search dot set text to age plus get dot get age. So let's just see if it works for age. Okay. Else we will print a GOption pane with some error. Let's see. Oppression failed error. Right, we will say this. So let's see if it gives us some age. So before saying search, we need to actually add some employee. So right here, so 6532 is the employee ID. So I'm saying search 6532 search employee and age is 25. Right, I am getting the age. So let's set all the others as well. So okay, now I'm just going to say lbl name dot set text will be equals to name plus select dot get name, right? Similarly, lbl name age gender dot set text div gender, and I'm going to say if my lect dot get, sorry, is gender turns me true, then set this particular gender to female, otherwise it's male, right? If and to add an else right here, so else it's a male. So let's copy and paste, and it's a male. So I'm done with my gender. Now let's go forward. So LBL department or degree. So let's say the degree. The set text will give us degree plus select dot get degree, right? Similarly, LBL department dot, let's say, set text to department plus select dot department, right? So it's department now. ABL, age is done, degree is done, department is done. Domain dot set text will be domain plus tag dot get domain. Next, LBL domain is done. Email dot set text will be email plus like dot get like dot get email here, right? Next, LBL email is done, our gender is done, name is done, nationality dot set text will be nationality plus like dot get nationality, right? Merely next we are left with, we're done with the nationality. Salary dot set text salary plus like dot get salary, right? Next real, what's next, salary, and that's it, we're done, right? So we are done till here. Let's save it and let's see the execution first, and then we'll see the debugging of it. So I'm adding an employee, we see. So let's change and some nationality, there's some salary, there's some email, employee ID, department, degree, and domain. And we're saying add employee, employee has been added. Now in search, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4. Search for the particular employee, and it's giving me. Okay, these things is only because the label size. So let's extend the label size first. Go to the design and into the search lecturer and extend this to like this, right? So you can do this by selecting all of them at once and extending their sizes, right? It will no longer do that. So let's see. I execute it and I say, so let's give it a right name. So let's say the name is employee 1, and age is, let's say, 30, and it's a male. Nationality is, let's say, American, and the salary is, let's say, 2500 USD. Email is one at the rate gmail.com. Employee ID 234. Department is computer science. Degree is MS, and domain is SE, right? So I say add this employee. The employee has been added. Now I'm searching for it. Just so I say 1, 2, 3, 4, search employee, and it's giving me all the details right here, right? So if I give it some 5897, let's say search employee, it says operation failed. The ID was did not existed. So right. One thing that we need to do when I say 5897, when I'm actually adding another ID, it should clear out on search employee, it should clear out this whole data right here, right? So let's say okay, close it. Do not worry about this. So let's do one thing. um, okay, so whenever my user clicks on search employee, I will say go to its mouse clicked. Right here my user is clicking on it, so I'm going to simply say these LBLs I'm going to change them. I'm going to set them to their defaults, right? I'm going to set them to their defaults like this. um Sorry, like this. So age will be set to the age, name will be set to the name, gender will be set to the simple gender. Just going to copy all of them here, and I'm going to make them default. Okay, the error then we saw at the back was because we were actually changing our original object. So let's not change our original object. It's not a good practice. So I'm to define another object like temp. I'm going to say whatever the leg data is giving, it will be saved in temp. I'm defining my temp, and I'm just going to replace that with my temp in just in this particular function, right? So that. And go here and temp. And it's done. Let's see if it clears out the data and gives us the right answers or not. So I'm saying ABC, and we have some nationality, we have some salary, we have some employee, and we have some employee ID, we have some department, degree, and domain. I say add employee. Employee has been added. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, and I say search for it, it gives me the right answers. Now I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and search employee, it clears out and say operation failed. I say search employee, it clears out and says operation failed. 1, 2, 3, 4, search for the employee, it gives me the data. I say delete this particular employee. 1, 2, 3, 4, it says the lecture has been deleted successfully. Now I say search this particular employee, and it says operation has been failed because this particular employee no longer exists on our database. So we are done with 3 operations: add, delete, and search, and edit is up to you. So let's see the debugging of the search lecture for once. So I'm going to add a debugger right here, lecture dot get data. So I'm going into my debugging mode and go to the debugger. So the very first thing that we need to do is actually add an employee. So it's employee 1. It has some age, it has some nationality, PK, and then okay. So we will add the salary 25 and give it some email like one@gmail.com. The ID, let's say, is 1234. Department is CS, and degree is MS, domain is SC, and we say add employee, and we will say continue, and it gives us a message that the employee has been added. Now we go into the search lecturer and we say 1234 is the ID and search for that particular employee. So let's go inside this function. So inside this, it's just setting up the employee ID for the model class to work on. So it's setting the ID. Now let's go inside the model class function. It's sending the link as DB to search for this particular employee ID, that whether it exists or not. So of course in this case the employee ID will exist, and now it's saying the DB to get the particular data. We'll go inside this particular function, and in this particular function it's again traversing the linked list for the particular to get the particular index. As soon as it gets the index, it returns that particular index of the linked list, which gets to us back to our model class, and we return that particular index, which goes to the controller, and controller then gets that particular object in obj and then sets its whole data to that particular object. So you can see right here the obj is being populated as soon as we are actually saying next and so on. So it says return this, and then we are right here, and at this stage we are actually just going to print the data in our form. So as soon as I say next, so it gives me this whole data. So this we have done the add, the delete, and the edit. Now the search is up to you guys. Good luck. Have a good day. Bye bye. Allah Hafiz.